The freighter Silver Nomad had always sounded tired, the kind of ship that sighed rather than hummed. Her plates were a patchwork of scars sealed over with spray foam and grit. Her engines carried a cough at idle and a ragged howl when pushed, but she knew the backroads of the Cygnus, verge threading between customs buoys and debris wake, like a fox slipping through hedgerows, and that made her valuable to captains who preferred to ask forgiveness after the fact. On the night the Dominion found her, the verge was a bruised horizon of nebulae and scattered suns. The stars here looked suffered, light filtered through dust and ion storms, until everything wore a gray-blue coat. In that thinning radiance, the Nomad limped with the subtlety of a distress beacon. 2 thermal blooms astern, hissed the sensor tech, closing on an intercept curve. Captain Hesa didn't swear she was past that season of her life. She tapped the holo in front of her and watched 2 knives of heat arc toward her ship. Masks, dirty as a miner's oath. The tech threw her a look that was half apology, half fatalism. They'll see us whatever we pretend to be. Captain Hesa exhaled through her nose and opened ship-wide. All hands to brace. We're about to meet new friends with old questions. The pursuers were Dominion patrol corvettes, lean and red-lit, the kind that wore their cruelty openly a design language of spikes and flensed angles. They came in at shallow vectors like predators easing alongside a wounded animal, to see if it still bit. When they hailed, the voice carried the false warmth of a magistrate greeting an accused. Freighter registered as Silver Nomad, standby for boarding and inspection, said the voice. Failure to comply will be treated as an admission of smuggling and piracy under article. Captain Hesa cut the channel, locked the cargo hold bulkheads. She told the first officer, everything else open and pretty. We'll let them feel like they're winning. Mum, the first officer said, carefully not looking at camera 3, the feed that showed the aft hold and what lived in it. Hesa saw the hesitation, saw the fear riding underneath. Do it, she said softly. En route auxiliary to environmental and sea hold. Keep it cold. In the aft cargo hold, between crates of farm synth and pallets of machine seed, a small shape sat on a folded tarpaulin, knees up, blanket draped like a hill. The blanket had been patched so many times it made a mosaic little squares of old shirts, and ship towels and fabric scavenged from markets on worlds with names the child could not yet spell. The blanket smelled faintly of ozone and metal, like the Nomad herself. The child listened to the ship's changes the way other children watch the sky. The boarding latches clanked. The pressure equalized with a shudder that ran through the deck. A thin smell of foreign lubricants leaked into the air. The child pressed their palm to the deck. Warm. The hum under it, a low animal purr, was steady. Silver Nomad was worried, but she wasn't afraid. Juno, the child whispered, and fabric rustled beside them, from between crates. Something pushed a blunt head out into the narrow aisle. 2 eyes reflected the emergency strip lighting, feral bright. The creature was badger-shaped in the way a starfighter was bird-shaped, an echo of the original, refined into function. Juno's forelegs were thick with corded muscle, claws black, and hooked like question marks. Her pelt looked plush in the dimness, but close to the skin it roughened into tiny articulated plates, bioceramic shingles that lifted. When she was angry, her muzzle was short, her shoulders high, and when she moved she kept close to the floor. A ghost of low-gravity hunts. The child held out a hand. Juno bumped it with her nose and breathed in, cataloging scent, lubricants, another ship's air. 6, no 7 new heartbeats in the corridor outside, arc scorched from plasma torches. Fear. Juno's lip lifted, just enough to show teeth. Quiet, the child murmured. The hold's side door irised open. Cold light lit the darkness and pooled, reluctant, round stacked cargo. Dominion troopers stepped through with the elegance of well-made machines, helmets smooth, visors opaque, rifles held upright against armored ribs. Their armor smelled of factory resin and the coppery, ghost ozone tang of freshly charged capacitors. The troopers spread like ink, sweeping their beams. Boxes, crates, a spill of bolts from a cracked container. The dark maw of a service crawl, each corner got a light, a glance, a gesture. Their lead paused at a regulation distance from the child. His visor threw back the child's reflection. Small, thin, blanket bundled around them like a cape. Identification, the trooper said. His voice carried the Dominion's vowels, sanded and narrow. "Stand, hands visible." The child stood. They were careful with their breath. Juno's breath was louder, a slow leak from a pressurized system. The child kept their hands up and wide. "What is your name?" the trooper asked. The child licked dry lips. "Ash," they said. Not a lie. Not the whole of a truth either. Ash. The trooper let the name sit in the air, as if expecting it to reveal more under inspection. "You will come with us." Somewhere forward, a heavy door banged. A voice rose, Captain Hayes's. Low and fierce, and a trooper answered in the pitch of someone whose job is to make just enough pain to be listened to. Juno's head turned, ears pricked. The plates along her spine lifted a fraction, and the faintest shiver ran through the crate stack. The child moved the smallest muscle, the curl of a pinky. Juno's eyes cut back. That was the training. The bonding weeks in a station lab that smelled of antiseptic and cooked dust. The long hours while a technician taught the animal to watch the child's hands. The way it watched blood. "Ash," the trooper said again, and stepped closer. The light on his breastplate framed a smear of old scoring across the laminate. Plasma had kissed him there once. It hadn't gotten to finish. Now, Ash took one halting step forward, blanket trailing, bare toes feeling for the deck's welded seams. The trooper angled his rifle only slightly, the motion of a man redirecting attention. A teacher pointing at a page. It was still enough. Ash curled their thumb. Juno went from statue still to force of nature. She poured from shadow like a fluid, claws finding purchase in the deck seams. A sudden snarl tearing the quiet into glittering ribbons. The lead trooper got his rifle halfway down before she hit the inside of his knee. With bone-breaking force. In low gravity, bodies behaved like stubborn thoughts. The trooper tipped, flailed for a counter, found none, crashed. Juno roared once, a sound out of an older world, and vanished under him. Armor screeched, composite plates failing in jagged peels. The other troopers jerking to aim had a problem. Targets too close, a friendly down. Too much reflex built for long corridors and clean arcs of fire. One squeezed off a shot and scored an explosion of sparks from crate metal. Another overcorrected. His beam knifed high and stitched the far wall, slicing through a rack of servo anchors and sending them clattering like bells. "Ash, down." That was Captain Hayes over the hold speakers, voice clipped with the need to be obeyed. Ash was already on their knees, blanket over their head, tucked small. Juno knew the shape too. The Badger ramped off the lead trooper, tore a ragged path up his backplate, and launched into the second. She always went for joints first. The place his armor moved. Elbow, knee, a slit where a pauldron pivoted. Her paws hit hard enough to drive plates into flesh. Containment. Barked a new voice in the corridor. A different cadence. The one who assumed commands. Ash's head lifted. Through the blanket's weave they saw boots, polished, tempered, walking with the confidence of an owner in their own home. Admiral Threx wore old rank like an inheritance and new armor like a second skin. He stepped past the tangle with a disdain that read as bravery. His sidearm, omnisleek, never wavered. "Target is a modified Mellivora," Threx said calmly into his shoulder mic. "Bonded unit, likely semi-sapient. Switch to wideband bolts. Aim for saturation." He had the tone of someone discussing a weather problem. Juno dropped low, belly skimmed under a wild shot, and came up directly in front of Threx. They looked at each other, the Badger with eyes that reflected a pupil within a pupil, the Admiral with a visor that gave back only a cold red ghost of the room. Threx did not flinch. He had been in rooms with worse than teeth. "Ash," he said, "call off your animal, or I will ventilate it, and the next 3 compartments for good measure." Ash's throat worked. They could taste the electric metal of discharged plasma in the air, the cinnamon copper of blood, the tang of Juno's hot breath. There had been exercises for this command words. Red words, but the room the exercises prepared for had been clean and bright, with technicians watching behind glass. That room had not had a man like Threx in it. "Ash," Threx repeated, and the calm wore thinner round the edges. "Your pet is a toy. Mine is a fleet." A fired bolt hit Juno's flank. It splashed light and pain. Juno screamed a brief, ugly sound and her plates snapped fully erect. The bolt had made a burn. It had not made a lesson. She spun and took the shooter's wrist in her mouth and shook until something gave. "Get the coil nets," Threx said tightly. They wanted to net Juno. Ash realized, and the thought landed with nearly physical weight. They wanted to take her alive. Peel her apart, parse what made her so loyal. Or they didn't care. It didn't matter which. Ash's fingers found the deck seam again. Small bones pressing hard enough to hurt. The ship hummed beneath. Silver Nomad was still there. Still worried. Ash unclipped the little square plate fixed under the tarpaulin. An access patch for local systems. Captain Hasa had shown them where. It was and how to use it, and made them promise never to, unless a certain list of words were true. Cornered. Outnumbered. No. Doors that lead to kindness. Ash slid the plate aside and touched copper with the tip of a nail. Sparks bit the skin. The hold lights hiccuped. The environmental vents sighed off and on. Threx's head twitched a fraction as his visor recalculated ambient. The temperature began to fall, just a notch enough to wake the coolant vanes starboard. Enough to tell the ship to pull heat from this compartment first. Enough to make a Dominion rifle throw a subtext error, because a battery didn't like cold. The air thinned, too. Hasa had routed the Orcs the way she'd promised. "Keep it cold, Admiral," said one of his troopers, voice piping high with stress. "We're dropping pressure." Threx's visor turned to Ash with a delicate hate. "You did that?" he asked. Ash's mouth was dry as paper. "We did that," they said. Juno came low and fast between Ash and the nearest trooper and made a sound like a saw tearing. The trooper stumbled back into another, and the coil net in his hands billowed uselessly into the path of a support beam. It wrapped the beam and sparked green. The smell was broth-thick now, metal, bright ozone tang. The wool-wet smell of Ash's blanket where plasma had singed a corner. "Ash," Threx said, almost gently, "you are small. Small things break. The universe does not stop for a small thing, however earnestly it insists." Captain Hasa's voice cut in again, an angry gift. "Child," she said, and Ash had never heard her use the word like a rank before. Now, Ash touched copper again and dragged. The patch wasn't meant for this. It burned a line through their fingertip, and tears popped bright and instantaneous in their eyes. The hold's inner doors slammed their locks. The outer door's bulkhead seals, 60 centimeters thick, spat steam as the emergency bolts primed. The ship groaned deep in her bones. "Stand down." Threx snapped, suddenly less than gentle. "Override their override, sir." "Their code is there's no code," someone hard-patched. Juno hit the trooper carrying the override kit, so hard his boots left the deck. The kit skidded across the floor and thunked against Ash's ankle. Ash grabbed it with both hands and dragged, surprised by the density. Juno whirled to plant herself over Ash like a living barricade, back arched, plates erect, a sawtooth ridge from skull to tail. "You are brave," Threx said, almost conversational again. And that was when Ash knew he had decided they were not going to die today. "People about to kill you didn't compliment you first. You are also ignorant. Step aside." He raised his sidearm so steady and fired. The bolt hit the deck in front of Juno's paw, a clean white punch that blew hot air into Ash's face. The warning was precise. Threx could have put it into Juno's eye. He did not. "Not yet, Ash." Captain Hasa again. "We're latched by 2. I'm going to break us loose on the 3 count. Clear the hold." Ash's breath went ragged with joy and fear. Clear the hold meant hang on to something you love and make yourself part of the ship. 1. Hasa said. Juno backed into Ash carefully until their shoulder pressed the child's chest. Ash wrapped arms around Juno's neck, face buried in the rough line where met composite plate. The badger smelled of warm dust and the faint bitter tang of the gel they rubbed into her plates. After fights to keep them flexible, Threx must have heard the countdown too. His head tilted like a man listening to an old song. "Take them," he said. "Now, 3, Hasa said, and fired the emergency undock. The Silver Nomad tore her own skin to get free. Latches blew with a percussion that felt like a fist under the heart. The docking bridge screamed as it sheared. A pearled spray of vapor shot past the hold's blown cameras in a bright arc. Dominion gravity and Nomad's gravity separated like lovers told to choose. For a second the world soft shifted. Up became wider. Down became mean. For Dominion troopers went weightless scrambling. boots losing the deck, helmets slamming into crates. Threx widened his stance by a hair, his boots clamping, and stayed. Of course he stayed. He was built for this. Ash and Juno were ready. In the partial lift of weight, Juno could jump farther, hit harder. Ash could pull more than they weighed. They used their smallness the way a fish used water. Ash dragged the override kit into the surface crawl under the deck lip. Juno turned her head sideways and shouldered after, plates scraping with the sound of a grinder biting metal. A bolt hissed past and splashed the crawl's edge with molten drool. Ash. Threx barked, and the bark cracked on something more human than command. The crawl's dark took them by the throat. The child slid, Juno shoved, and they fell together into the ship's warmer belly. The crawl was loud. The nomad's ribs sang. Fluids moved in capillaries. A loose wire one deck up rattled like a bone harp. Ash's hands shook as they jammed the override kit's clasp with blood-slick fingers. The kit finally opened with a mean little cluck. Inside, 2 coil cutters, a patch plate, a jury rig seed the size of a thumbnail that could teach a door to be a wall. Ash, Juno said it without words. The bond through images, the deck seam, the copper bite, the broad-shouldered man like a cold mountain, the curve of air that smelled wrong where it came in with Dominion breath behind solder. I know. Ash set the seed plate in the crawl's narrow network trunk and pressed until it bit. The ship's hum shifted. A new layer joined the cord, higher and brighter. The sound of a laugh almost. Doors in the hold, the ones that mattered, learned new answers to old questions. Captain. Ash whispered, throat sore. Where I see you, Hasa murmured. Good work. Behind them, in the hold. Threx faced a problem he had not needed to face in years. Improvisation. The child had slipped the net. The animal had bloodied his men. The freighter had hurt itself to live. He took all that in and made it into a single sentence in his head. This is not an inspection. This is a hunt. He wanted the badger alive. He wanted the child alive. He wanted the captain alive enough to answer how a freighter had gotten a bonded Melivora through Dominion checkpoints. He wanted the Verge to feel the Dominion's teeth again, the way it had when his predecessor had turned 3 floating towns into slag mines. He holstered his sidearm with deliberate neatness. We fall back, he said, and his troopers startled at the unexpected verb. Seal the umbilical. Cut their engines from the dockside. They've chosen to be quarry. Let's make a cage of the corridor, in the crawl's dark. Ash listened to the boots retreating and trembled with relief that felt like weakness. Juno pressed her head under Ash's chin, a weight and a heat that anchored the child to themselves. The ship said, breathe. Ash breathed. Captain, Ash whispered, finding their voice again. He's cutting the engines from dockside. I know. Hasa sounded tired and exhilarated, like someone writing a joke on a bomb. But he has to cross the spine to do it, and I've just taught the spine to bite. Get to Safe 2, that's an order. Safe 2 was a cupboard in a forgotten pantry where the nomad's bulkhead became a bruise of welded metal and ancient repairs. Ash had slept there more than once. Juno curled in a cama at their knees. It had a water pipe that sang in the night, and the air always smelled faintly of sweet biofuel. It had, more importantly now, a gravity compensation unit that could be told to fail in a very specific way if something bigger than a child tried to pass. Ash and Juno slid through the crawl and out into a shadowed corridor that had once been white but had not been that for years. The ship's strip lights flickered to low to hide their movement. Vents whispered. The deck gave under their feet the smallest fraction, a living thing adjusting her weight. Ash wanted to cry. Instead, they pressed a palm to the nearest bulkhead. Thank you, they told the ship. The metal did not warm or answer, but a panel to meters ahead popped its latches and swung, showing a shortcut that hadn't been open last week. Juno chuffed. Her plates settled a fraction. The burn on her flank blistered, raw and ugly. Ash touched it with care. Juno whined, a small sound, more apology than complaint. Later, Ash promised. We fix it later. Behind them, alarm klaxons shifted to a new pattern. 6 beats, a pause. A long low moan. Dockside cutouts failing. The Dominion would be moving like red ants kicked out of a hill. The Nomad wasn't out of danger. She might even be deeper in. But Ash had seen Admiral Threx look at them and choose not to kill. He had made a mistake. On the verge, word traveled like light through dust, scattered, refracted, slow to penetrate and hard to extinguish. By the time the silver nomad rolled away from the Dominion bracket, half the sidebend pirates would know she'd made a fool of an admiral. The other half would try to make a fool of her, for the prize of saying they'd done what he could not. Ash ducked into safe 2 and pulled the panel behind them. Juno followed, careful with her shoulders, then turned and set herself facing the door. Her plates lay flat again. Only the rise and fall of her flank told the truth of her pain. Ash tucked into the space under the water pipe and let the sound of it singing erase the bolts, the blood, the bolt-scorched blanket. They laid their head against Juno's shoulder. The badger breathed, slower now. The sound a cat might make if it weighed 40 kilos and dreamed of biting stars. Good. Ash whispered into Fur. Good girl. In the corridor, far away in ship-measured distance, and next door in fear distance. Admiral Threx touched his visor and called up schematics he was no longer certain he could trust. The freighter's lines resolved old, inconsistent, wry. Somewhere in those lines was a child who had made the ship colder on command, and an animal that did not know how to stop. He considered the story that would be told if he failed. He considered the one that would be told if he succeeded at too high a cost. Make a perimeter, he said at last, and heard the edge in his own voice. No one goes anywhere without for guns on the corners. And for the love of rule, if you see that badger, shoot the floor first. He did not add the thing that had risen in him unbidden, and now would not sit. Never corner a human cub. He had never been sentimental about sayings. He believed in paperwork and debriefings and the neatness of final reports. But as the silver nomad shuddered under him like a living horse under an unwanted rider, as cold crept up his calves from a vent he had not noticed, as a small steady handprint smeared in blood dried on the edge of a maintenance hatch, Threx felt the verge itself lean down and whisper the rest of it in his ear. The silver nomad's corridors were narrow veins, built for cargo first and crew second. Anyone larger than Ash had to stoop in the service runs. Dominion troopers in their gleaming plates looked like armored beetles jammed into pipes. Their rifles caught on walls, boots clanged against plating, and helmets turned stiffly. Blind to what scuttled beneath, Ash and Juno moved like they had always belonged. Ash crawled, shoulders brushing conduits warm with current, hands smeared with oil and blood both. Juno padded ahead in silence, claws finding perches on deck seams. Her plates clicked faintly as they shifted, a language of readiness that Ash had learned to hear. Somewhere aft, Dominion boots were everywhere. Admiral Threx's orders had multiplied them. Sweep every passage. Cut them off from the command decks. Pressure them inward. The child has nowhere to run. But Threx underestimated what inward meant aboard the Nomad. The first guard never saw it coming. He was stationed at a cross corridor, visor sweeping, rifle trained on a hatch Ash might have used. The boy's shadow flickered in the corner of his optic feed, small, fleeting. Like a rat bolting for cover, he raised his rifle. Contact. The floor beneath him gave a sudden metallic scream. A panel slammed upward, kicked open from below. Juno erupted from the crawlspace with the sound of tearing canvas, her teeth already around his forearm. The rifle discharged once into the ceiling, searing a gouge. Before the badger wrenched it sideways and drove the guard into the wall, armor buckled. The man screamed once, then Juno clamped down at the joint of neck and shoulder. His scream cut to silence. The corridor reeked of ozone and coppery blood. Ash scrambled up through the hatch, wide-eyed, but said nothing. They simply touched Juno's flank, a single pat that told her enough. Juno released the guard. His body slumped, armor scarred with long, brutal gouges. Come on, Ash whispered. The chase of alarms shifted tone again, a rising pulse that meant breach echoing down the decks. Troopers began shouting to each other in clip Dominion code. Ash didn't understand the words, but the rhythm told the truth. They were afraid. They're hunting us, Ash whispered. Juno turned her head back, eyes flashing in the low light. The look was unambiguous. Then we hunt them too. They slipped into the dark. The Nomad cooperated. Lights flickered out to corridors ahead. Doors that should have been locked hissed open just wide enough for Ash to crawl through. Vents breathed faint drafts that carried Dominion voices toward them. but never betrayed their own whispers. The ship had made a decision, Captain Hayes's decision, or her own. The Dominion squads weren't built for this kind of war. Their doctrine demanded overwhelming force, clean corridors, civilians herded with shock rifles and compliance fields. But here they were crouching, jumpy, flicking rifle beams into empty hatches, and Juno learned. Every time a trooper stepped wrong, Juno remembered. The scrape of metal on boot, the hiss of servos powering up, the pattern of their breathing inside helmets. She stalked them in the dark, darting out only to strike joints, strip weapons, vanish again before return fire. To the troopers, it must have felt like fighting a shadow with claws. Admiral Threx watched through his visor feed, jaw clenched. His men were being slaughtered by what? A child and an animal. No, he reminded himself. Not just the Mellivoro was engineered. He had read reports of Union skunkworks projects feral guardians bred with spinal reinforcement, sensory enhancements, bonded neural pathways, experiments dismissed as impractical, uncontrollable. Yet here was living proof. He keyed his mic. Do not attempt single capture. Quadrant sweeps only. Overlap fields. Keep your visors linked. The animal uses shadows, deny it shadows. Static crackled back. A panicked voice broke protocol. Admiral, it doesn't matter. The feed cut in a scream and a blur of claws across the lens. Threx muted the channel. He hated screams in his ears. Ash's hand dash wasn't only hiding anymore. Each time Juno struck, Ash was nearby, not fighting, but changing things. They pulled fuse bars, shorted cameras with a shard of metal, jammed hatches open with strips of blanket. Small sabotage, but enough. A door refusing to close at the wrong moment meant Juno's ambush succeeded. A flickered light meant a trooper's visor lagged one heartbeat too long. Ash had been afraid at first, every breath tight in their chest. But with each success, the fear thinned. The Nomad answered them, and Juno never faltered. For the first time, Ash felt something rising through the fear, a hard, small pride. They can't stop us, Ash whispered into Juno's ear as they crouched in a shadowed junction. Juno's only answer was a low chuff, warm breath fogging in the cold air. The Dominion tried something new. Ash and Juno rounded a corner and were met with a crackling wall of blue-white light. A containment net. It spanned the corridor floor to ceiling, a weave of charge coils hissing ozone. Troopers waited behind it, rifles braced. End of the run, one said. Voice echoing through the field. Surrender the animal. The child will not be harmed, Juno snarled. The field's light painted her plates in a jagged halo, claws scraping the deck. Ash's heart thudded. There was no way through, no shadow to hide in. For the first time since the hold, Ash froze. Then the ship hummed underfoot. A panel behind them hissed open, just a crack, just wide enough. Cold air breathed out. Ash grinned, sharp and small. Not the end. They slipped back, Juno covering the retreat, and vanished into the new dark. The troopers fired anyway, beams slashing through empty space. The net collapsed as the ship cut power to the corridor. Their field winked out, and in the sudden dark, claws came from behind. By the time the Dominion regrouped, 3 more men were down, and the story had begun to spread, whispered between squads, across open comms despite Thrix's attempts to contain it. A human child, a bonded beast, shadows turned into teeth. The lesson was writing itself in blood and panic. You can never corner a cub or their honey badger. The Dominion had learned to fear shadows in the Nomad's guts, but Admiral Threx wasn't about to let a child and an animal dictate the rhythm of his hunt. Seal compartments C through G, he ordered. Force them into the spine. Flush the vents, make the air unlivable. His troopers obeyed, flooding the ship with hissing plumes of suppressant gas. Pipes sang, seals clamped, and bulkheads rang shut. Pressure gauges dipped dangerously. The Nomad groaned like an old creature roused from sleep. But the ship wasn't passive. Lights dimmed and brightened in patterns that weren't standard. Panels slipped open for Ash and closed behind them. Sometimes the floor shook at just the right moment, throwing Dominion boots off balance when Juno leapt. And all the while, the story of what was happening inside spread across the verge. Rumors in the dark, great skiffs loitering at the edge of the fight heard Dominion chatter. Unit down creature loose requesting suppression fields. Dockside smugglers at Freepoint intercepted fragments. Small human, bonded Mellivora, tearing squads apart. By the time the words reached the Union side, they had already changed. The child became a commander. The badger became a demon. The nomad became a ghost ship. Legends traveled faster than FTL, and fear was the best engine of all. The bridge gamble Captain Hesa sat in the dim-lit bridge, knuckles white on the console. Her crew was gone or scattered, some captured, some hiding, a few dead. The ship bled from every seam, but her voice stayed steady on the internal comm. Ash, they're locking us into the spine. That's where they'll try to take control. Ash crouched in a crawl space, Juno's head pressed against their thigh. We won't let them. Ash, listen to me. You can't beat them in numbers. You'll have to beat them in fear. Do you understand? Ash hesitated. Then, I think so. Their voice was quieter than the hum of the conduit, but Juno's ear flicked, catching every syllable. The first trapped Dominion moved like an advancing wall. Rows of boots and rifles. They swept down the spine corridor in formation. Behind them, Admiral Threx walked with the calm of inevitability. Ahead, the corridor was silent. A few scattered crates, a dangling wire sparking faintly. Nothing else. Then the floor shifted. Not much, just enough. Dominion gravity stuttered as the Nomad rerouted her field. Boots lost traction. The squad staggered, rifles jolting. That was when the lights died. The only illumination came from helmet visors and the faint glow of rifles. In that sudden black, something moved low and fast. A snarl ripped the silence apart. Troopers fired wildly. Beams carved walls, slagged crates, punched holes into the deck. One man's visor feed showed claws before it went static. Another screamed about teeth. When the lights returned, 3 troopers were down. Blood slicked the deck in wide arcs, and written across the bulkhead in those arcs, smeared by a child's hand, was one word: leave. Threx stared at it for a long time. His jaw worked, but he said nothing. The growing terror now. Squads were whispering on open channels, breaking protocol. It's in the vents. I heard it breathing. No, it's not in it. It's them. The cub controls the ship. The beast is just teeth. Shut up. Focus fire. Shut up yourself. You didn't see its eyes. Even disciplined soldiers could not fight shadows forever. They began firing at phantom movements, wasting charge, burning each other by accident. Ash listened from the vents, heart pounding. They hadn't killed as many as the troopers thought. Most of it was fear doing the work. And Captain Hesa had been right. Fear was stronger than numbers. Ash smeared another message on the deck with a scavenged carbon rod. Your fleet is next. The bridge assault finale. Threx forced the issue. Enough. Bridge advance. I'll take it myself. He led the last of his squads toward the command deck. The bridge doors loomed ahead, sealed. His men began setting charges inside. Captain Hesa whispered to Ash on the comm. They'll blow through in seconds. You have one chance. Ash pressed a patch plate into the deck conduit. Juno crouched beside them, trembling with fury and anticipation. The plate hummed, linked, and the Nomad gave Ash everything she had left. The bridge doors blew inward. Dominion troopers stormed through, rifles, shields, Admiral Threx at their center. And the ship itself fought back. Gravity inverted for 3 seconds. Troopers slammed into the ceiling. The deck spat sparks. Consoles exploded in white fire. In that chaos, Juno leapt from a crawl hatch directly onto the first wave. Claws ripping through shields like foil. Ash dropped behind her, a small figure with eyes too steady for their age. This is our ship, Ash said. Threx's realization for the first time. Admiral Threx felt something he hadn't in years. Doubt. He saw his men falter, heard their screams, smelled blood and ozone, and realized he wasn't fighting rebels or pirates. He was fighting a legend in the making. Every decision he made from this point on would ripple across the verge. If he lost, the story would break the Dominion's spine in this sector. If he won it to high a cost, the story might still do the same. And worst of all, he could not kill the child. The Union would make a martyr. He locked eyes with Ash across the smoke and chaos. The cub stood behind their beast, but there was something in their gaze sharp, unflinching, that made him feel cornered. Never corner a human cub. He thought bitterly. The retreat. Threx made his choice. Fall back. He snapped. Seal the bridge off. Withdraw to the ships. But, Admiral, do it. Now. The troopers obeyed, dragging their wounded. The bridge doors slammed shut behind them. For the first time since the ambush began, silence settled over the nomad. Ash leaned into Juno, burying their face in her fur. The badger panted, bloodied but unbowed. Captain Hase's voice crackled in their ear. You did it, cub. You turned them. They're running. Ash was too tired to answer. They only pressed closer to Juno, who curled protectively round them. The lesson in the hours that followed, the Dominion limped away. They left behind wreckage, dead, and something worse, a story, across taverns and outposts. Smugglers and miners told it in whispers. A child had held off a fleet. A honey badger had torn Dominion troopers apart. A freighter had fought like a living thing. The lesson burned itself into the verge. Never corner a human cub or their honey badger. And Admiral Threx knew it would follow him until the end of his career. The silver nomad limped out of the verge with wounds deep enough to make her creak. Like an old war horse, whole panels were scorched black, half her sensors were blind, and one of her engines howled when it cycled up. But she was still flying, and for Captain Hase, that counted as victory. In the aftermath, the ship's interior smelled of antiseptic foam, burned circuits, and the copper sting of dried blood. Crew survivors staggered through triage, patching, binding, salvaging. In the midst of them, Ash sat cross-legged on the deck with Juno's head in their lap, rubbing salve into scorched plates. Hold still, Ash whispered. Juno huffed but didn't resist. She was hurt, but not broken. She had fought through worse and would fight through worse again. Her red eyes followed every movement in the corridor, watching, guarding, even in exhaustion. Ash leaned their head against Juno's skull. We're safe now. The words sounded thin even to them, but Juno's breathing slowed, and that was enough. Whispers among the starsnews spread like radiation unseen. Unstoppable. At a smuggler's dock on Caliban's Hollow, a spacer swore he'd seen a Dominion squadron retreat from a single freighter. They didn't run from guns, he said, loud enough to catch ears. They ran from a child, in a pirate den orbiting the ice moon of Nataris. A scarred mercenary raised a glass and declared, word is. The badger ripped through plated Dominion armor like it was paper, took a trooper's head clean off on the Union's capital world. An intelligence officer slid a datapad across a polished table. This cub, she said, has done more for morale in the verge than any fleet action in the last year. The story changed with every telling, growing teeth, claws, and new shapes. Ash was said to have spoken in tongues that bent the ship to their will. Juno became a demon beast with fire in her breath. The nomad was described as a ghost vessel with a soul. Legends didn't need truth. They needed hunger. And the galaxy was starving for a story that could scare the Dominion. Admiral Threx's silent sign his private quarters aboard the Dominion flagship Vigilant. Admiral Threx stood before a mirror, helmet off, eyes sunken. His report sat unfinished on the console behind him. Every time he tried to write it, the words twisted into mockery. Engaged freighter. Encountered bonded Melivora. Sustained heavy casualties. Retreated to regroup. Retreated. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He had told himself it was tactical. Preserve men, avoid martyrdom, prevent a story from growing. But the story had grown anyway. Now, in the silence of his quarters, he admitted what his pride would never allow aloud. He had been afraid. Not of the beast, not even of the ship, but of the child. The way Ash's gaze had cut through smoke and blood, unblinking, unflinching. It was not the look of prey. It was the look of something he could not control. He closed his eyes. The whispers of the verge seemed to follow him even here. Never corner a human cub. Or their honey badger. The Union's calculation in a dim Union Council chamber. Analysts debated strategy. If the story spreads, recruitment will surge, one argued. Every miner and freighter crew will think they're the next legend waiting to happen. And the Dominion will hesitate, another added. Their patrols rely on fear. But now fear cuts both ways. A general frowned. It's only a story. One child. One beast. Yes, the analyst said. But that's all it takes. Stories don't need fleets. They need symbols. And symbols make armies. Ash's quiet night in the Nomad's safe too. Ash curled under the patched blanket with Juno pressed warm against them. The ship hummed around them, steady again, like a heartbeat in metal. Ash wasn't sure what to do with the whispers they overheard over open comm bands. They heard themselves described as a commander, a warlock, a weapon. None of it felt true. They were just a cub who had been scared, and a badger who refused to stop fighting. "I don't want to be a story," Ash murmured into Juno's fur. Juno gave no answer, but her breathing was steady, and her weight against Ash was real. Ash closed their eyes. For now, that was enough. Tomorrow, the galaxy could tell whatever story it wanted. The lesson etched in fear weeks later. Dominion patrols in the Verge found themselves hesitating at sensor blips. Was it just another freighter, or was it the freighter? Troopers muttered about glowing eyes in dark corridors. Captains ordered retreat when faced with shadows they couldn't explain. And spacers across the border lifted drinks in smoky taverns and whispered the same refrain. Never corner a human cub. Never corner their honey badger. The lesson had spread beyond fact, beyond fleet logs, beyond control. It had become something larger, something even the Dominion could not kill. Because the galaxy had remembered, and the galaxy would never forget.